Please consider supporting Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. You can learn more about them at bwunited.ca. They are always looking for donations and volunteers. So please, again, support Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. Again, that website is bwunited.ca.
Hi, I'm Jed Bodwin, and I live in Wichita, Kansas. I am a Patreon supporter for Creative Control. I discovered Creative Control some years ago, I think maybe while looking for interviews with Tommy Stinson of The Replacements. And I stumbled across this conversation that Vish had with Tommy Stinson that was really insightful. Vish held his own. I think Tommy can be a little bit of a difficult interview at times. And it went really well, and it really got into some areas that I wasn't expecting. And I thought, gosh, I have to listen to more of this guy and his podcast. Yeah, sometimes I'm not necessarily a fan of the music or musicians that Vish will have on the show, but I always appreciate their creative process a little bit more. And more times than not, though, it does lead me to finding a new musical artist that I'm interested in, or to think a little bit differently about maybe some artists whose work I've overlooked. So, go ahead, and if you've been waiting at all to support Vish and Creative Control, now is probably the best time to do it. I know as a public radio employee here in Kansas, listener-supported broadcasting, whether it's podcasts or radio itself, really isn't a thing of the past. It's actually very much a thing of both the present and the future. So, yay Vish, yay Creative Control.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control today.
Bob Mehr, Jason Jones, and Ed Stasium are American people who worked together on a remarkable reissue of the classic album Tim by the legendary rock and roll band The Replacements. Initially active between 1979 and 1991, with sustained reunion touring activity occurring between 2013 and 2015, The Replacements have been subject to fascinating and painstaking retrospective assessments, including Bob Mehr's wonderful 2016 book Trouble Boys, The True Story of The Replacements, some recently released archival live performances, and some wondrous expanded album box sets via Rhino Records, including Dead Man's Pop, which won a 2021 Grammy Award for Mehr's liner notes. On September 22nd, 2023, Rhino releases the 4-CD, 1LP deluxe set Tim, Let It Bleed edition, which through a painstakingly detailed process revisits and reimagines The Replacements' 1985 album Tim. And to celebrate this remarkable achievement, I had a great talk with the aforementioned authority on Replacements lore, Bob Mehr, one of the band's biggest fans and champions at Rhino, Jason Jones, and the legendary recording engineer who rebuilt Tim songs and outtakes using the original session tapes, Ed Stasium. There's a lot to listen to and think about with this Let It Bleed edition of Tim, so please enjoy this deep dive into how it all came together. A part of the Entertainment One network with the support of listeners like you who follow and subscribe to this donor-driven podcast and spread the word about it, and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/Creative Control. That's the primary source of revenue for all the work that I put into this podcast. So please, if you can, visit my Patreon and support this show and my work today. Thank you. With additional support from Blackbird Music, a wonderful record store with bricks and mortar locations in Edmonton and Calgary, Alberta, and very friendly personnel who will happily help you look for whatever it is you need in the store or online. If you go to blackbird.ca and you're looking to order something, just go to their website and you can order it and they'll ship it right to your house. Say you want to order yourself a copy of the Let It Bleed edition of Tim. Again, go to blackbird.ca, type in Tim, Let It Bleed edition, or The Replacements, or whatever, what have you. You know what to type. And sure enough, if they've got it, they'll ship it right to your house. Just that simple. So thanks again to Blackbird Music. Plus in-kind support from the likes of Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, respectively, in Guelph, Ontario, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario. This is episode 803 of Creative Control, featuring the lovely and talented Bob Mehr, Jason Jones, and Ed Stasium discussing the replacements with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hey, Bob, how's it going?
Great, Vish. How are you?
I'm well. It's nice to see you again. Thanks for being back on the show. Where in the world are you today?
I am actually in Memphis, Tennessee at the moment, and looking forward to talking with you about another Replacements box set project.
You said that as if we maybe have done too many of these. Are you okay?
No,
you happy
no. It's a perennial event getting to speak with you about one of these, and always a joy.
Thank you. I appreciate you coming back. It does mean the world to me, and it's nice to see you. Also rejoining us, I suppose. Jason, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Vish. How are you, my man?
I'm very well. It's nice to see you. How are you feeling and doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Good.
It was my birthday yesterday.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. And it was a birthday I'll never forget. I was in the emergency room, and now I'm here and feeling great and excited to talk to you again about another glorious Replacements box set.
The show must go on, Jason.
The show must go on, man.
Well, listen, I don't want to dwell too much on it because it's nobody's business, but thank you for joining us again after a night in the emergency room. And also, happy birthday. Come on, that's amazing. You had a
Thank you.
birthday at the hospital. Much. That's where, if you think about it, that was your first birthday.
Oh, yeah, that's
probably
right.
You were back in the hospital.
And it's very Replacements-esque, take me down to the hospital.
Exactly. There you go. Well, it's lovely to see you. And joining us for the first time on the show, Ed, are you there?
Hello, Vish. Greetings from fabulous Poway, California.
Oh, lovely. I don't know that. Whereabouts in California is
North County, San Diego.
Oh, lovely. Hey, you guys had that thing come by, that storm. Everything okay?
Didn't do shit.
It didn't do anything, right? That's what they said.
Anything. No. Okay. I mean, there's been days down here where there's like 5 inches of rain and the street floods and I can't get out because I live on a hill and at the bottom it's just a creek and it gets up about 2 feet deep, but nothing happened here. I mean, it was like an inch and a quarter. No wind, no damage, nothing at all. It bypassed us.
Well, good. That's great.
It did, down in other areas of the county, it did some damage, but not here, fortunately.
Well, that's amazing to hear, Ed. It's a real honor to get to speak with you. Thanks for making time and being on the show. I really, I sincerely mean that. Thank you.
Thank you, Vish. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
No, that's great. All right, well, we're going to get into this thing. And again, Bob and Jason in particular, I say congrats again on another wonderful set. Let's begin with Jason because he's ailing and I want to make him work hard right away.
Okay, go for it.
In terms of the assembly of this one, it seems to me that you had a lot of exciting material to choose from in terms of songs, photos, images, stories to tell. How did making this Tim set compare to the other ones that you and Rhino have put together and we've discussed?
Well, this one was a bit of, I think the last time that we spoke, or maybe it was the first time that we spoke about the Pleased to Meet Me box.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
One of the things that I had mentioned whenever you posed the question of what's going to happen in the future was I mentioned that Shirley would love to remix Tim.
Yeah.
And Bob and I had talked about it for a while. And if we already had the idea in mind to potentially approach Mr. Stasium about doing said remix. However, the thing that kind of was a potential roadblock for us was what bonus material we could use, because we had already used the only professionally recorded live show that we had on hand as a part of the Maxwell's release. And also the outtakes, all of that material seemed on the face of it to maybe not be there. So it took a bit more of digging and discovery in order to really kind of shape everything. You know, the discovery of the full Alex Chilton recording sessions really was a revelatory moment, and truly digging into the multi-track recordings from the Tim sessions yielded a lot of fruit.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more there than initially met the eye and the ear. And there was a brief moment when the Warner Music Group Vault team said, we've got some budget to do some tape transfers or at no cost. And I'm like, well, here's all of these reels of Tim that I would like transferred for free. And it was mountains and mountains of tape. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And I was like, well, you guys said that it was going to be free. So please, like, go ahead and transfer it. And having the ability to have that stuff and live with it for a moment and not be on the hook for a forthcoming project, which was one of the reasons why we took a break between after Sorry Mom, because Bob and I really did want to have a real deep, like, clear path of what we wanted to do with the catalog. Since we had already done 3 extraordinary box sets, we knew that those were the ones that were not the easiest, but the ones where we had the most malleable stuff in our hands. So the next ones would take a bit more, digging and scratching in order for them to take shape. So living with the Tim material and being able to have the kind of discussions and, doing the proper research into the approach and into the additional songs that were recorded but not used, it all started to kind of take shape, because we have set a pretty high bar.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't recall, Jason, were you involved in any way with the, I want to say it was the 2008 reissues? I might have that year wrong.
No, those were primarily Peter Jesperson.
Right. So those things, and Tim in particular, really spoke to me because the Tim reissue that I have on compact disc has all these outtakes, a chunk of them, which are on this thing too. So I would have thought someone in the Vault team would be like, remember 2008? We have way more stuff that we didn't even put on that CD. Did anyone, because that was, someone called something for that reissue, obviously, right?
Yes, but some of that stuff was primarily 2-track stereo mixed stuff. So the actual ability to go and dig into the actual multi-tracks themselves was something that I would say the company at the time financially were not interested in doing.
Okay.
So the fact that we have had a good track run of successful box sets means that there's larger budgets attached to the projects, which means that we can do the proper archival work that we need to do in order to make great defining box sets.
It's nice to hear that Warner Music Group seems to have come into some money. That's great. What, did an aunt die and leave them an inheritance? No, I'm just kidding. That's great. That's great that they're investing in these because they're amazing. All right. I appreciate that background, and I wanted clarity on that because I love the 2008 disc.
The 2008 one is great, and to me, like, the key to all of it is the Tim version of Can't Hardly Wait that's on the All for Nothing, Nothing for All double disc set from 97. Like that, just as a fan who bought that 2 CD set back in the day, like, I was like, man, Tim could sound amazing.
There's are there 5 Can't Hardly Waits on this one or something like that. They're all unbelievable. I love it. I love it so much.
Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, there's 4 on
There's
CP3.
4, but I think plus the
live.
I think
plus the live version.
Yeah,
so
then there's 5.
Yeah, I was right. Let's just clarify. I was correct. I wasn't technicality. All right. No, I appreciate that background, Jason. Now, having said that, and I don't mean to jump ahead into future planning. So this feels like it must be everything that was captured for Tim and for those sessions. But knowing you two, you and Bob, is it really everything? Is this everything?
Well, it's everything. It's everything that was commercially releasable.
Okay.
Really, I would say.
Yeah.
There's that version of "I Want to Destroy You," which the roadie sings,
right.
which we're like, not about that. And we talked about it briefly, Bob and I, about maybe using it as an instrumental version, but it's just not there.
Okay.
And Bob, is there anything else that we left out?
There was from the Chilton sessions, there was a kind of halfway version of Heart of Stone and a blues jam, and Ed kind of took a pass at trying to see if they were salvageable, but there's nothing, no, everything you would want and more is on this set. And, we try and maintain a high level of quality while at the same time also give a kind of sneak peek into the creative process. I mean, there's alternate takes on this set where you hear the song kind of evolving, and, those things, I think if it has to kind of cross a pretty high bar for us to include it, where it's either sounds great, has historical value, or provides some kind of insight into the creative process as the band was formulating, some of these iconic songs. And, basically everything has to tick off one or all of those boxes. And so that's kind of the standard that we sort of try and hold it to without getting too much into the, being able to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, listen, before we get to Ed, who is a central figure in this set, obviously, and I can't wait to talk to Ed about some of the choices he's made here, because, just a spoiler alert, it's like a brand new record for me, having listened to it for so many years. It's unbelievable. So I can't wait to talk to Ed. But Bob, just for people listening, I want to ask you about the story of Tim,
Sure.
The context that brought this album into being. It was, just briefly, I'll do what I can to contextualize it a bit more. It was their major label debut. It was a transitional time for the band and its membership. Their manager and champion, Peter Jesperson, was sort of marginalized, or maybe sort of, is putting it gently. Tommy Ramone was brought into the fold. This record has a really compelling story. And once again, it's captured beautifully in the liner notes here. You're an award-winning and best-selling storyteller, Bob, so I want to go to you on this. Again, for those who might need some background, can you give us a brief overview of maybe where the Replacements were at as a band when they began working on Tim?
Sure. Basically, coming out of 1984, which was a big year for them, they'd put out their 4th record on their hometown indie twin tone, Let It Be, which obviously would become a classic. They were already getting sort of some nibbles from major labels. Warner Brothers in particular, a junior A&R man, Michael Hill, who had been a friend of theirs, had been attempting to sort of sign them, but not making much headway with his bosses at Warner Brothers. Let It Be comes out in the fall of 84. The band starts touring, generating great reviews, obviously based, on the kind of strength of Let It Be. That December, they're the subject of a Village Voice cover story by R.J. Smith as they roll into New York City for a couple performances, one at CBGB's where they're billed as Gary and the Boners, and which turns into a label showcase essentially of all the major labels in New York coming out to see them, which in predictable fashion, they sort of turn into a drunken covers set and scare off most of the label suitors. And then they have another gig a few days later, at Irving Plaza, which by all accounts is one of the best shows they ever played. And, one of the people who saw them that night was Seymour Stein, the head of Sire Records, which was a part of the Warner Brothers sort of, larger company. And Seymour falls in love with them, decides he wants to sign them, sort of teams up with Michael Hill, who he brings in as his A&R man on it. And they basically begin the process of negotiating a deal, which takes a few more months. On that same trip, the Replacements run into, open the show, have Alex Chilton open the show at CBGB's. They connect with Alex. So that's kind of that weekend or that week in New York sort of begat, what would become Tim. January, Alex comes in and records some demos with the band, essentially kind of some new songs that Westerberg had from the road. And Great stuff, obviously, including Nowhere Is My Home, early versions of Can't Hardly Wait. And then sort of as the deal is negotiated and they finalize it, the search for a kind of producer begins. 1985, it's sort of hard to know who should produce the replacements. It's not the era of the alternative producer yet. It's still, you've got your 70s kind of guys or your real indie producers, the Mitch Easters of the world. And so that was always going to be a struggle with the replacements. And I think also for the replacements, they'd never worked with an outsider, or their first 4 albums had all been done with some combination of Peter Jesperson, the engineer, Steve Felstead, and Westerberg, and or the band, kind of producing or credited as producers. So it was a new era for them to kind of figure out what that role was. And so there was some talk, Chilton wasn't a real viable candidate. And then there was some talk of, a few other people, even Robin Hitchcock, who they were a fan of. But really pretty quickly, because of the association with Sire and the Ramones, who were on Sire, it was settled that Tommy Ramone should produce the record. But in fact, at that time, Tommy had just come off of doing Too Tough to Die for the Ramones, a big comeback record, which reunited Tommy with the Ramones and Tommy with Ed Stasium. So initially, there was a lot of talk that Tommy and Ed would produce what would become the band's major label debut, the Replacement's major label debut. And it ended up, I think, out of a kind of abundance of caution, given the sort of combustible nature of the Replacements, let's keep them at home, have them record in Minneapolis, have them work with at least an engineer they were familiar with, not have all outsiders come in. And so they settled on a combination of Tommy Ramone producing, Steve Felstead engineering. And Steve is a fantastic engineer, and I think Tommy made a great record. I think there was a little push and pull with the band in the process of mixing the record, and I don't think anybody was quite sort of happy with the finished result, but it was a baby band on a major label. It wasn't a huge budget. Yeah. Let's put this out there and see what happens. Here, 30 some odd years later, we have the opportunity to kind of revisit that material and bring Ed Stasium into the mix, literally and figuratively, to kind of give us a new version of Tim.
Well, first of all, Bob, that was an astounding summary. And for those who can't see us right now, which ideally is nobody except us 4 and probably some Zoom executive who's bored, I just want to say that was astounding. And Bob was not reading anything. Bob, you just have this at the ready. Like if someone pulls up to you at a bar and says, "Hey, tell me what the Replacements," you can just go like that, just like a machine.
I will bore them
for hours.
I will bore them into a coma. I'll put them in a.
Wow, no, it's amazing. I hope everyone listening feels like they're fully informed. Unbelievable. Thank you, Bob. More on some of that stuff in a bit. Let's go to Ed. Ed, you also, not to sell you short, you wrote a great essay in these liner notes as well, explaining your role in, like I said, I think making Tim kind of sound like a brand new record to me. And as Bob just alludes to, you have this sort of near-miss history with the original sessions. Can you talk about what you were kind of up to when the original sessions for Tim were being planned? And then now, you've like Bob says, this magical, weird cycle of events. You're back. You're back. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what was going on when the band was working with Tommy, and then also like your approach to these sessions now that you were given the opportunity to revisit them. Can you speak to those things?
Oh, geez, sure, I can do that. And Bob helped with my essay, by the way. I don't remember. Bob mentioned, I just finished Too Tough to Die with Tommy.
Yeah.
And I guess I based myself back in New York. I was in LA from March of 81 until March of 84. And then, I was brought in. I came back to do a Peter Wolf solo record up in Boston at the Car Studio. And then we mixed it in New York, and I was living in L.A., and everybody's like, "Ed, what the hell are you doing in L.A.? You got to come back to New York. Come on back." So I moved back to New York and just started working out of Right Track doing, what was I doing back then? I did a band called Face to Face, it was the Boston band Face to Face. And then I did some work going out to England with Julian Cope, and I can't even think of what I was doing.
It was a busy period for you, though. I think, right? You were saying
it was super busy. It was nonstop. Yeah, it's always hard for me to recollect. Everything sort of jams together. And
the reason I ask, and I think Bob just alluded to it, I think part of the context of you not working on it in the end was you were swamped. You were pretty busy. Is that right?
Probably, yeah. but I didn't hear a peep about me being involved at the time.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I think what happened is when I talked to Michael Hill, who was the band's A&R guy, I think originally the idea was, Tommy and Ed were really kind of a team historically, having worked on the early Ramones record and then done that kind of Ramones comeback record with Too Tough to Die, and immediately preceding the Replacements record. And again, I think it was, which is funny knowing Ed now, I think there was some thought of, boy, the Replacements and a professional engineer, because Ed is such a, kind of feel guy and seat of the pants approach and really kind of makes great raw rock and roll records. But I think there was just an idea of like, and that had more to do with the Replacements of, we don't want somebody who's going to put the Replacements through their paces or whatever and spook them, because they're such a delicate sort of creature. But I think, unfortunately, it would have been a great combination. But yeah, so I think there was talk internally, particularly on the A&R side of let's get Ed and Tommy. And then it was like, well, then the band will want, should we bring him to New York? Should we leave him in Minneapolis? And it ended up kind of being one of those situations where I was like, well, we'll split the difference here and have Tommy go to Minneapolis and work with them.
Yeah. Thanks again, Bob, for having all the facts. It's amazing.
He does have all the facts. That's for sure.
Yeah. I read in I believe it's your essay or the one you wrote with Bob, Ed, that you worked so well with Tommy that Tommy's brother was supposed to manage you as a production team at one point.
That did. Yeah. I even remember, I came across a contract that he had drawn up, but it never came to fruition.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it just didn't happen. But there was definitely talk about it.
Yeah.
Never happened though.
For those of us who love the Ramones, can you give us a little sense of what it was like to work with Tommy? I mean, obviously you didn't work on this record with him, but just generally, what was it like working with him?
We got along great. I was brought in. Tony Bon Jovi brought me in to Leave Home. I was living in Canada. I came back. The first thing I did was the Ramones Leave Home in November of 76, right? Yeah, 76. And we just got on well. It was we came from the same type of background. I've mentioned this before. Tommy had an engineering background. He worked at record plant, worked on some Hendrix records with Bon Jovi. That's how we knew Tony.
Yeah.
And he was an assistant over there. So Tommy was, a player. He played guitar, played drums. And so did I. I played all the band instruments, and I was always the guy in the band who would figure out the song. And, I'm talking like high school and stuff. Going back that far, I would get a record, listen to the record, and figure out the chord changes, write down the lyrics, and that was the beginning of my production career.
Yeah.
Little did I know, though, I did not know what I was doing. So Tommy was basically doing the same thing. And he was into making records. I was into making records. He loved recording. So did I. And we just got on immediately. And we were the team. Honestly, Tony Bon Jovi wasn't around much for any of those Ramones recordings.
Yeah.
He was off trying to make deals for stuff, and Tommy and I made those records, and we had a great time. What a great college it was.
Yeah.
It was my college education. Diving into it, it was great. Coming back, I was actually living in New Jersey for most of that time, and then commuting into New York to do those records, and then we started Power Station with Tony, and went to Rocket to Russia. We cut the stuff at Media Sound. And it was always very quickly done. I mean, for goodness sakes, Leave Home, we cut the backing tracks like in 3 days.
Yeah.
And then Johnny double-tracked his guitar. It was an experiment, but we liked it. And, he double-tracked his guitar on the time it takes to get from Queens to Manhattan on the subway. Seriously, he was just one after the other. Bam, 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 next song. Okay, Commando, okay, boom. It was great. And Tommy and I were buddies. We talked all the time, and we were a team. He was more of an intellectual with his concept with the Ramones, and I was, I had my ideas as well. And I also started playing guitar and doing all the backing vocals on the records that I did.
Yeah.
So we went on, and then the first production that Tommy and I co-produced. We did Leave Home, the Rocket to Russia. Then we did It's Alive on New Year's Eve, 77 to 78.
Yeah.
And that was the first co-production. And then in summer of 78, we teamed up to do Road to Ruin at Media Sound and spent, maybe 6 weeks on it. It was great.
Well, for what it's worth, I've told Jason and Bob the story before, I think, about my son and I bonding over Tim, in particular, by the Replacements. They may forget it because they got so much going on. So I'll briefly retell the story. But I want to say, Ed, my daughter, Ramona, is named after the Ramones. That's how
Sweet,
much they...
sweet little Ramona.
That's right. That's how much they mean to me and my family. And what had happened was my son was, 2-3 years old and was in the car seat one day, and I had left my copy of Tim in the CD player, and it turned on the car and it blasted out. And I was like, uh-oh, yeah, get this out of here and put Raffi back in. And then my son was like, wait, what? What is that? And then I put it back in. And so he loved it. By the end of within weeks, he knew the words to every song. Some of them he probably shouldn't have known all the words. That also kickstarted a Ramones thing. And I was like, oh, I can play the music I like. I don't just have to play Raffi and Fred Penner. Anyway, then my son, the first 5 Ramones albums, he would be like, I know what the next song is. And he would go through the sequencing, and he was singing along to, again, 53rd and 3rd. I should have skipped. But my point is, he loved it. He loved it so much. And so anyway, I have this parental bond with the Ramones and Replacements. Sorry to bore you guys. I just want to say...
It's amazing. I think it's great. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
what a great story.
It's really meaningful. So I asked about you and Tommy for a particular reason. There is a mythology around Tim and how Tommy captured it and how he mixed it. And that is a big part of the story of this set, is you going back to those sessions and trying to figure out what happened, I guess. Can you talk a little bit about what you had to deal with, so to speak, what you discovered in taking on this project, about what the stories about Tommy and the recording of this record actually meant? What was true and what was false? Can you speak to that?
Certainly. Well, first of all, thank you, Bob and Jason, for bringing me on to the project. They contacted me, I guess it was almost a year ago. I think it was in September of...
August or September.
Somewhere around there. And they sent me a multiple-page dossier about what we'd like to do with the record. And talking about the sessions, talking about the multi-tracks, what's on there. I mean, these guys studied those multi-tracks. They knew every track that was on there. And I had to do, my job basically was to do a bit of, audio forensics, especially with the vocals and especially with, Bob Stinson's guitar, which, he only came in for a couple of days apparently, and just threw down some tracks, a lot of which was not used on the original mixes. Or if it was used, it was buried in that wash that the mix turned out to be, which a lot of people love, by the way.
Yeah.
So, for instance, we wanted to have all the original vocals that Paul did. And on several songs, maybe half of the songs, there were several tracks that were done of Paul's vocal. Maybe 2-3 tracks. I think one song had 4 tracks of, 4 takes. And when I'd have to A-B them, I'd have to time stretch them because we're working on tape, don't forget. So I had the production master and the multi-tracks really didn't match up. So I had to stretch the, using Pro Tools, I had to stretch so they matched up. Mm-hmm. It's a complicated process. I had to actually hire somebody to do that on a couple of the tracks.
I see.
Because they kept moving. And I would match them up, and then I'd have to listen. I put Paul's vocal on the right-hand side, put the band, the original production mix on the left side, and I would listen in stereo to both of them with no track, just Paul's vocal on the right. And I would find out which vocals matched. They comped those vocals, okay? They would use different sections of the vocal, and like a word here, a phrase here, a chorus here. And I had to figure out which vocals they used. And because they didn't comp it, usually in comping, and I had even done that with, going way back with comping, even on Too Tough to Die, I remember comping Joey's vocals, and we'd always bounce them to one track. Say there's 3 tracks of a vocal, you'd bounce that to one track. And then we'd have that track, but with this, they used a computer, an early form of computer.
Yeah.
I don't know what method it was, but they switched it with the computer. They muted it and brought it in. So I had to figure all of that out.
Yeah.
And
the truth is, Ed had to do a lot of work. Basically, had to sort of relive the sessions in every moment of tape and go back and sort of initially put it all back to where what was on the master, and then figure out, well, what can we add to this, and what else can we kind of go through. But this wasn't a thing where it's sort of just like we gave Ed prepared materials and said, hey, you just kind of mix it like you're playing a game. It's like he really had to go through every inch of tape and rebuild the record as it was originally, and then sort of go back and see what else he could do. So it was a pretty Herculean effort on his part. Again, partially because of the technology they were using sort of in the mid 80s. This is all pre-Pro Tools, but they were using a kind of early computer, which sort of made everything that much harder. And so Ed really had to, like I say, live this record and every sort of inch of tape all over again.
This is true.
I really appreciate that insight, and I can appreciate the work that would have gone in, given the different eras and technology. I'm curious about this dossier and getting some more background on it. I like calling it a dossier. I feel like we're in a James Bond movie or something. Jason, given the infamy around the sound of Tim, I assume you and Bob in particular, and anyone else involved, might have had particular ideas about what could be done to kind of revitalize this album. Can you give us some background about what you handed over to Ed in terms of some suggestions, directions, I suppose?
Well, I think some of the original intention within the original mix, we didn't want to be lost.
Yeah.
And there are certain flourishes within songs that we didn't want to be lost. However, in listening to the original multi-tracks, the thing that really popped out to both Bob and I is the fact that there was lots more Bob Stinson than met the ear. And we wanted that to be heard.
Yeah.
Because he made a lot of very thoughtful and interesting choices with his guitar work that really needed to be heard. And also, we wanted Tommy Stinson to be heard.
Yes.
For the first
the
time.
low end, yeah. Yeah.
We just wanted it to sound like really like full.
Yeah.
Just wanted to sound full.
Yeah.
We wanted the Dead Man's Pop approach to Tim.
Right.
I think what sort of really accelerated the thought process of remixing Tim, and way back when even before Rhino was involved, I had kind of met with the band and drawn up a list of sort of dream projects, most of which we executed. This was way down the list because I thought this was so far fetched and didn't really know if the sounds on tape would be there. Part of the myth and the legend of this record that you talk about is, over the years, the band has said, Paul said, my amp was broken, or, they didn't record this or that. None of that turned out to be true. It turned out actually the band, again, Tommy Ramone produced a fantastic record. Steve Felstead engineered a wonderful record, and the band performed and played the hell out of this record. And somewhere in the mix, some of that stuff maybe got diluted. So we weren't sure until we really went into the multis originally to be like, first of all, is there something here we can work with and give to Ed to sort of work his magic? Turned out there was. And I think just fundamentally what we sort of tried to convey via the dossier and was what the band had sort of always wanted was, for it to sound much more like they did at the time, to have some power in the rhythm section, to really be able to hear the bass and the drums as you would have heard the band playing in the studio or on stage, because I think at this point, Tommy Stinson and Chris Mars, the drummer, had really locked in, and they were a fantastic sounding rhythm section. There was also obviously Bob's guitar parts, which again, because they came in sort of after the fact, the basic tracks are cut as a trio, which is the first time that happened. And Bob came in and threw everything on over the course of a day. And then Tommy really had the kind of onerous duty of editing that out, and kind of picking and choosing. And I think anybody in that position would tend to sort of play it safe and say, okay, well, this feels like too much. So I think he had really good discretion in editing some things out, but then kind of maybe a little bit threw the baby out with the bathwater, because Ed found some wonderful stuff that really did fit. But I think at that moment in time, it probably made a lot of sense to him to make the choices he made. And then the third thing was there was just some kind of elements of the era, production-wise and aesthetically, in terms of the drum sound, the digital reverb or the reverb sound on Paul's vocal, which again were stylistic choices I think Tommy made, but it didn't maybe serve the band and who and what they were. So I think there's again, with all these things, it's less a question of trying to create a new history or even be revisionist, but actually to go back to sort of what was closest to what was happening in the studio and what the band was sounding like at the time.
Again, I appreciate that. You know, it's interesting as you're speaking and hearing Ed talk about what was actually on the tracks and you talking about it, Bob. Like, this is a notoriously self-deprecating band, and a self-sabotaging band. So the record comes out, you know, commercially it's not a huge success, and then the rumbling. I was a kid when this was going on, so I'm just going to speculate. This band had a tendency to be like, that thing we made, it sucks. We suck. We're a bunch of losers. We don't know what we're doing. Then you get the actual, and so I'm guessing for you, Bob and Jason, you've heard this band mythology about what went wrong with this record. Then you get access to the multi-tracks. What is it like sensationally, Jason, to hear it and be like, what the hell was Paul talking about? His amp wasn't busted. It sounds great. Like, what was that sensation like to be like, oh, this is actually fine, we can work, it's great. Can you describe that feeling viscerally, what it was like?
I mean, it's like Christmas morning. It is. I mean, the fear that Bob and I had was that a lot of the reverb was baked into the multi.
Right.
So that it would kind of cancel out any hopes of doing a remix. But the fact that everything was actually well recorded meant that this project had hope.
Yeah.
So it was amazing. Like I spent many days just kind of outlining different mixes with various guitar parts to just kind of outline to Bob, like, okay, here's what's possible with this, here's what's possible with this, like, and that kind of somewhat informed kind of the infamous dossier that we keep alluding to. But yeah, no, it was like Christmas morning. It was amazing.
And I should add, you know, the thought in the back of my mind the whole time was Ed. You know, we have to get Ed to do this, and that was really the only person. You know, it was. You know, when we did the remix on Don't Tell a Soul with Dead Man's Pop, that was very easy to connect that because the whole idea was let's get Matt Wallace, who produced the album, to finally get a chance to mix it properly. With this one, obviously, with Tommy passing in 2014, you know, obviously we would have loved to have had Team Tommy and Ed to do the remix, but unfortunately Tommy passed those years ago. So it's like, we have to get Ed. Yeah. Or, you know, I had some, you know, obviously just in the role of producers, like I had some fallback ideas, but really Ed was the only person the band wanted. Ed was the only person we wanted. And fortunately, you know, the fact that he was available and willing to do it. And again, it's not the, you know, it could be viewed by some, you know, as a thankless task, particularly the amount of work that Ed had to do, you know, given the technical constraints of this material and how it was recorded. But, you know, we were very fortunate that basically the dream was fulfilled, and the kind of alternate reality of this record, you know, we were able to do because Ed was, you know, not only willing to do it, but really willing to dig in and get into the weeds of this record and really, like I say, relive the experience that, you know, he just happened to miss the first time, but he got the full experience having to go through all this tape.
I did, and I enjoyed every minute of it. I was dedicated. I still am dedicated to this record. You know, getting all the stuff out there and finding it was enjoyable. Yeah. It was enjoyable going through it and pulling, you know, and the sounds were like, it was recorded well. Yeah. I mean, in the dossier, a lot of the gear that they're using was reported to have been pretty old and not great, Paul claimed, and that one of the speakers in the amp was not mic'd properly and blown at the time. But when I got the multi-tracks, you know, the recording is great. Sounds great. Sounds fantastic. You know, the drums are recorded well. The guitars are recorded well. The vocals sound fabulous. So that end of it was all there already. And it was just digging in and finding the right parts, especially from Bob's guitar playing, and finding those, you know, doing the same thing that I did. I'm sorry, did I say Paul or Bob? Bob Stinson's stuff. Yeah. Bob Stinson's guitar. And I did the same thing that I did with Paul's vocal, you know, matched up what did he use and what's this other track. And there was tracks I didn't use at all. And there's some great stuff on it.
Yeah. I want to ask about those tracks. I just want to say that I couched that last question in terms of the band's tendency to self-deprecate.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like, Bob, you were just saying, I asked Jason this question. There's a new mythology about the Replacements that's coming because of Bob. You wrote this book that's unbelievable. Now these sets are coming out. The fact fiction thing with this band is very funny. It's amusing to me that they're like, my amp was busted. He mic'd the wrong speaker. And then you've discovered that's not true at all.
Yeah.
Bob,
I mean, of course, memories and what happens in the studio tend to thing. And that was probably the default thing. The reality is that, given the band's status at the time, once they got to the mix, and again, this was the longest in a way that the band had ever spent, at least in a concentrated way, making a record. And they just signed with Warner Brothers. And, as I try to explain to people, no record is ever made in a vacuum. It's never just like, we're going to make a great record, and if we're not happy, we're going to redo it. It doesn't work like that. So I think by the time they got through the mix and had worked with, again, the first time they're working with an outside producer, and I think Tommy really took, really the reins on this record. And whereas on all the other records, the band had been involved, they even had their hands on the mix. It was a new experience for them. So there was probably, just given that fact, there was going to be some dissatisfaction about how it sounded. But they weren't really going to fight. They weren't the type of band to fuss and fight about it. There was also the reality of it as one of the first bands from the kind of American indie scene to sign to a major label. There was already going to be a lot of suspicion about, a band selling out, going commercial. Yeah. And so the fact that it didn't sound like, it wasn't certainly a glossed up sounding record and it had its own kind of weird sound, probably in the Replacement's mind, and Paul said this in the book, was like, probably wasn't the worst thing to have a not, overly sort of, a polished sounding record. But I do think that, as with a lot of things, that sort of did the band a disservice. They should have probably fought for a better sounding record or something they would have been more satisfied with. The fact is, as you mentioned, they were sort of in a transition with management at that point, and the first thing that the new manager wanted to do was remix the record. But, that wasn't feasible either. Yeah. So I think it just became one of those things where it's like, we'll put the record out, and while the sales weren't great, the critical response was unbelievable, and to this record, and it made them, the hot band of 1986 and the first Rolling Stone hot issue, got them on SNL. So it wasn't that the mix hindered or in, kind of their success or response in any way. Yeah, it didn't sell a lot of records, but that was sort of almost beside the point. The Replacements were about as hot as a band could get, at their level in 85, 86 off the strength of Tim. So nobody really questioned it until years later, as with Don't Tell a Soul, where it was sort of like, and I always say the two records that the band probably had the least input on mixing were Tim and Don't Tell a Soul, which not coincidentally are the only two records we've gone back to and done a remix on. So.
Well, I think it's also fascinating that in previous sets and in previous album session stories, you hear a lot about antics, things that kind of went nuts. This set, the narrative about the Tim sessions begins with the band purposely playing a fuck-off, walk-the-room show at CBGB's. Right. But then the session they seem to take very seriously, I think. I'm sorry, I'm guessing. There's not those stories
That is actually true. They were, I think, once, again, working with an outsider in terms of Tom Ramone, I think initially there was like, they're figuring each other out. The band Replacements as a band were very insular as people, as a group. And so I think it took a little while, but, they had respect for Tommy as a producer, had respect for the Ramones. And so, and I think what they were hearing in the studio during the playback initially before the mix was sounding really good. So I think everybody went with it. And Paul even talks in the liner notes about, we actually hunkered down and thought, okay, well, let's give him something to work with. And so they were probably more disciplined on this record. And I think, quite frankly, Paul knew he had a really wonderful batch of songs and wanted to kind of, honor those in his own way. So there was that. And, they'd worked with Alex Chilton. So they'd worked a little bit with an outsider. So it was a process in this whole thing. So I think they were very serious in this. I think the issue, in terms of kind of the dynamics internally, had more to do with the fact that Bob was sort of starting his sort of slow, protracted split from the group, and that was kind of coloring the sessions as well. And so that was maybe more of the issue at hand, rather than them getting sort of drunk and getting crazy. That really wasn't the case with this record.
And I know that Tommy Stinson talks about it in the liner notes, or rather, you spoke with him about things like Swingin' Party and Here Comes a Regular. Like they really mark a sea change for the band. And I can't, those of us who want to read into those lyrics, like I feel like they both really capture what was going on in the band. And at the time, things were changing, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is so, as always with the Replacements, so much of who and what they were is in the songs, is in the music, is in the lyrics. And, this was a confusing and interesting time for them as people and as a band, a transitional time, both, within the framework of the group and the dynamics of the group, of them, leaving a major label or leaving a, indie label, going to a major label, them growing up as adults, all that stuff. And I think that's, that's sort of poured into every sort of bit of this record and the songs. And I think that's partially why it's, it was received so well at the time and has become the classic it is. You can almost, without sort of being explicit about it, you can feel that tension and that fear and that hope and that, everything in that record.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Ed, I want to talk to you about some of the choices you ended up making, I assume, in conferring with Bob and Jason. The voices in particular are getting to me. The additional new voices I'm hearing, Paul's voice, I think some backup singing comes every once in a while. Again, I've lived with this record a long time. And when you live with a record for a long time, you know it. And every once in a while, this one's playing. I'm like, what the hell's going on? Who is that? Why is Paul saying that? It's remarkable, because I know you've done a lot with, again, part of the story of this record is the way Tommy Ramone mono mixed it, and you've panned guitars. It sounds mightier. But I just want to ask you about the emphasis on the voice. You alluded to it earlier. What was it about the vocal tracks you were hearing that made you feel like they needed to be brought up and added to the mix, so to speak? Can you speak to that?
Speaking of the backing vocals,
I hear primarily and chatter and just like almost guttural sounds and like la's and all these sorts of things. Yeah,
there are bits and pieces that if you listen to the original mix closely, a lot of that stuff is there, but it's buried. It's like, what was that? Do I hear that? And then Bob and Jason gave me explicit notes on, because I would come up with a mix, send it to those guys. They would dissect it for me, and they're very, very helpful. And I really appreciate their efforts into getting the mix done. And they say things like, you should bring those background vocals up. Get that piano. That piano part's great.
Yeah.
We couldn't hear that on the original. So they were very helpful in putting everything together. Like I always say, I just turn the knobs. And I got a lot of guidance from Bob and Jason on this. In addition to the dossier, these are all the mix notes.
Right.
These are mixed. Look at all that. Want me to throw them up in the air? It's crazy.
Well, Vish, the things you're talking about, and Ed and I talked about this a lot. There's stuff like, for example, in Left of the Dial in the outro,
my God.
there's this humming. That's on the original. That's on the original mix, but you can't hear it. So some of it is what Ed has done in terms of the architecture of the record, in terms of the separation of the guitars, in terms of the clarity that you get now. You are able to hear things more discreetly that was there, but sort of was all kind of bunched into a wall of sound and this kind of mono sounding thing. Now it's just opened up. So that's why I say, in the sense of, what Ed did with this record fundamentally is so crucial, that it opened up all this stuff that was, 70% of it was already there. It just, you couldn't hear it. And so that's what I mean by saying it's like, it's a radical reinvention of a record. And yet at the same time, it's the same record, for the most part, 70-80%. And that's credit to the way Ed sort of heard and saw this record and his kind of genius in terms of being able to kind of allow all the stuff that was there to bloom and to be heard, essentially.
Yeah, I would always A/B the original mix to what I was doing constantly.
Yeah.
I'd line them up. I'd be listening. What's happening at this section, and then especially finding other guitar parts, like in Little Mascara. Bob Stinson does this da 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 da, which they didn't use at all.
Yeah.
It was just on a track all by itself, and he was just like jamming. And he was playing along with the track, and it's a great little hook. It's a cool thing.
Yeah.
That comes to mind, especially.
There's stuff I think too. Like for example, also in Little Mascara, Chris Mars does this really high vaulting backing part in this sort of second chorus. Yeah, and it's just there. So that's like, there's these kind of ghosts almost now that you hear or can pick out. There's a lot of stuff where Paul's obviously doubling himself. I mean, most of the vocals are Paul. There's some things that are Chris, but like, in I'll Buy, where Ed just found a bit or a part and would add it to that for punctuation, for emphasis. And again, it's not something that when you hear it, you immediately, maybe you in your case, Vish, because you know the record so well, but you do feel like there's something added, something plus, something extra in there that.
Yeah, it's emotional.
Yeah.
Like I will say, Jason, I don't know if this resonates with you as a fan. But Yeah, I think it's the outro to Left of the Dial where Paul's humming.
Oh, yeah,
Paul's
dude.
humming,
Yeah, and it freezes me. Like, I'm almost brought to tears by a guy. And then I'm like, the thing with this sort of thing is, as you get older, you're like, did I remember this wrong? Did I miss this somehow? You're saying this was there. Jason, is something wrong with me? I'm getting emotional about a guy who's humming at the end of a song. What's wrong with me?
I
Did
think
you have
you're
that?
fine. I think you're fine.
Okay.
I think that, it's something to where really in revisiting and kind of reliving the making of Tim, and the wondrous work that Ed has done, the extraordinary work that Ed has done.
Thank you.
I remember whenever we got the test pressings for the new mix, like that's when it really hit home that something extraordinary was happening, something that was larger than all of us was happening, to where we, some of the mark of a good archival project is when you can give a fan base a new record from their favorite band. And if you can give someone a new version of their favorite album by their favorite band, then we're doing something really right. So that's kind of what I think about with this new version of Tim. It is like a new Replacements record, but it's a version of Tim that you've never heard before.
I keep saying that to people, and I feel kind of nuts saying it, but it really... Sorry, guys. I'm not going to have many opportunities to say this to you. Thank you for doing this. It is really remarkable. And to get very personal, Bob, Jason, has anything in this process brought you to tears? Because I'm curious how... Yeah, Jason's nodding his head, everyone.
Oh, yeah.
He's also heavily medicated, so who knows what he's actually thinking. Bob, were you did you get emotional with this?
Yeah, I mean, when we got the Left of the Dial, where sort of at the end, you hear it's Paul saying, in the kind of pre-outros, Paul says Left of the Dial, and then Alex Chilton comes in singing that part. And one of the things that I think Alex probably didn't do was put himself up a little bit more in the mix, but it's such a beautiful moment. Yeah. Every time I heard that 50 times, and every time I got emotional hearing that. Or hearing something like Here Comes a Regular in the version and the interpretation Ed has done in his mix, where the piano kind of threads through all the way through the song and builds to the solo. And I just thought, man, it's so great. And again, one of the things that talking about the overall picture is one of the reasons I think this version of the record is more emotional is because you're hearing Westerberg's vocals, which I think some of the best singing, some of the most emotive singing of his career, more directly. While I do think reverb has its place, and there's certainly reverb on this record, I think the excess of it on the original, in a way, even though it's a great stylistic trait, and I think that's what Tommy was going for, it's like Paul was singing so good, and these songs are so direct and emotional and powerful. To hear him singing a little bit more unadorned, I think that also adds this whole other layer of sort of meaning and power and resonance to those songs. And so that's another thing, just in terms of the overall concept sonically for the album, is like, let's hear Paul more. Let's kind of strip away the effects and let the man and the voice and the power and the actual kind of native emotion of this carry the production as well. And so I think that's one of the things, again, that in Ed's overall sort of vision of this record has really come through.
Yeah.
Well, and it's also something to where I'm still listening to Tim. I'm still in it. Like, I'm still listening to the box, and I still find things that continually take me by surprise and make me emotional. Like,
I hit a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
It's all subliminal. It's magic. I'm a magician. I'm a wizard.
Well,
just hiding things.
Baked in some tear-inducing stuff. That's what you did.
It's
Evil.
like here comes a regular. That's all I gotta say. Here Comes a Regular, like, still blows me away. Even to this day, still blows me away.
You read Peter Jesperson's description of being in the room and cajoling. He gets some intel that Paul's sitting on a song and basically puts him on the spot. Hey, buddy, you holding out on us? You got another song? And then he does it, 2 takes, and they're in tears, the 3 of them, the guys in the console room or whatever. It's really emotional stuff. And I don't, like, this record ranks, this is the one that got me. So I just want to say that this is a meaningful one for me, and I hope I've conveyed that enough without sounding like a blubbering moron, but it is a really meaningful one. I want to quickly, just to give people who are hardcore fans a little bit of insight about the outtakes on this set. Nowhere's My Home has circulated in a version before. Having Fun is a big revelation here, a song that Tommy wrote. Is there anything, Bob, that you want to say to kind of illuminate what that disc is going to do to people? Like, we're all talking about how much we're in tears all the time listening to this thing. What is that going to do to people, do you think, Bob?
Well, I think it's, again, and Ed was involved in mixing or remixing a lot of that stuff. I mean, I think fundamentally we had such an incredible batch of material with the Chilton sessions, the January 85 sessions that Alex Chilton produced. And again, that was done very quickly, but I think the band, and significantly, it was the last time the band was really working in the studio as a four-piece with Bob, fully integrated. You've got this legend, another mythical character in Alex, and that relationship of Alex and the Replacements blooming. So, there's a kind of historical sort of overlay on all that, but the tracks are just fantastic. They just come off a year on the road in support of Let It Be. I mean, they're kind of at a peak as a band. And when you hear, Nowhere Is My Home and the couple versions of Can't Hardly Wait, you can really hear that. And so for those quickly mixed things to really get a polish from Ed in terms of the mix, amazing stuff. And again, it was recorded at the same studio, Nicolette, but recorded in a different room. So they have their own sound and a different drum sound. And again, with Bob being, they're basically four-piece live, in the studio, the Replacements at what might be their absolute peak. So it was very important to include that on there. We've got, for the first time, both of the Tommy Ramone demos that he came in April of 85 and did as a sort of test session. And then we've got what I think are a really remarkable set of alternate takes. You mentioned Having Fun, which is a unique sort of, it's really the only kind of purely unreleased composition. It's probably the earliest Tommy Stinson pen song that Paul ends up singing. Yeah. And if you listen to it, it sounds like a Tim track. It sounds like so much of that era and so much of kind of what Westerberg was writing, even though Tommy wrote it. Just it's such a odd, unique track. And Stinson is playing lead guitar and Tommy Ramone's playing rhythm on that. So it's a really interesting kind of studio experiment, obviously done in some downtime. And then the alternates of, iconic songs, Bastards of Young or I'll Buy, the different versions of things. I mean, to hear Bastards of Young without the, very famous scream intro and this totally different vocal effect that Paul's doing, where he's just sort of hut-hutting the intro. It's like, all that's the kind of, catnip for fans and for people. And I think both with the remix in the main and also with the alternate tracks is the Replacements spent an entire career, as you say, kind of, deferring or downgrading their talent or their artistry or their effort, as a protective impulse. But I think what you hear on this record and this set in particular is how creative they were, how much they worked, how thoughtful they were. Yes, they were a down and dirty rock and roll band, and there's a lot of stuff that's live. But, listen to the ending of the vocal ending of Little Mascara, all these parts. Yeah. That was, as Ed said, it was, an orchestrated idea. Paul is a very creative, brilliant guy who was just coming into his own in terms of understanding and using the studio with this record. And I think it's something they evolved even more with Pleased to Meet Me. And again, on Don't Tell a Soul and and Dead Man's Pop. So I think, again, it's a lot of the intention, the fundamental intention behind doing these projects, and this project in particular, is to let you really hear what a great band and creative unit and artists these guys were, rather than just the sort of rock and roll rebels and hellraisers. Well,
and I appreciate that. And picking up on what you were just saying about intention about the set, but Jason, like these versions, again, I alluded to this earlier, these versions of Can't Hardly Wait are they're utterly fascinating to me. This is a guy, Paul in particular, who is taking the song super seriously, trying it all in these different ways. And like, I'm telling you, these acoustic versions, this cello version, they get to me almost more on some level than I'm pointing to my record collection, the Pleased to Meet Me version. Yeah. And in a way, like they really get to me. I don't know if you can expand upon it, but do you have any insight? What is it about that song?
Let me say that,
no, go for it, Ed.
The cello version of Can't Hardly Wait is Paul and a guitar, all one take.
Right.
That's just like you're just sitting there playing his guitar, and the feel is so immensely incredible.
Yeah.
that, I mean, I didn't get to tears on anything. I'm not, but the hair on my arm stood up a lot. Let me tell you that much.
Yeah.
And what's left of anything on the top also stood up. But that, and his timing, I mentioned this to both Jason and Bob, that, Paul's timing is impeccable, because I had to move some of that cello stuff around to make that composite of the 2 tracks that were there. And I took stuff from the end of the song. There's no click track. He just played it from his heart. And, with the rhythm of his heart, he played that song. He sang it at the same time. And, I flew in cello bits from the end of it into the front of the song. And it was like, okay, that works.
Yeah.
And that's in time.
Yeah.
Because of Paul's playing, his intense playing, and his heart.
Yeah.
This feel. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, I feel like you allude to this in the essay, that his rhythm guitar playing is impeccable, I believe is the word that is used. And that's a nice...
Bob's word, probably.
Bob's word. I appreciate that. I just want to revisit this with Jason for 1 second. This song, what does it mean in the Replacements canon? I have a sense of it, but the fact that it's, to me, it really looms large on this set. It looms large on the 2008 reissue I mentioned, Can't Hardly Wait, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What do you think? Why is this song so significant to this record, even though it's not even on it?
Well, Bob, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a song that he wrote in 1984, right?
Yeah, and they were performing for much of that year live before they ever.
And it wasn't it the song that actually Seymour heard, where he was like, "That's a hit." It's got like
very possibly. Yeah,
he's like, "That's."
I mean, it is such an immediate.
Seymour was pretty drunk, so who knows what song?
Yeah,
as I recall.
Well, it was actually Jesperson. I think after I Will Dare was seen as the that's a kind of signpost song, and then Paul wrote the Can't Hardly Wait very shortly after they had completed recording Let It Be. And of course you'd be like, oh, why didn't we put this on there? And they just, Twin Tone didn't have the financial wherewithal to sort of stop everything and do it. But anytime, as soon as Jesperson heard that, and clearly Paul knew it as well, that was it's a key, crucial song for a number of reasons.
I think he does know it. That's why I assume that's why he's working on it so much and trying to figure it out. Is that a fair way of looking at it, Jason?
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
Yeah, that's totally a fair assessment of it. And of the multiple versions that are on disc 3 of this set, for me it's all about the Air Shaft version, the very first acoustic demo version. I remember downloading that from
the vocal isn't up yet.
The vocal's super low, and then it comes back up. I remember downloading that from like Napster in like 1998, and then like a hissy 6th generation cassette rip of it, and it being the most ghostly, ethereal thing that I had ever heard, because all I knew was the Tim version on the second disc of the All for Nothing, Nothing for All set, and the Pleased to Meet Me version.
Yeah,
that's all I knew.
Yeah,
and to hear this completely out of left field, very emotional version has always sat with me. So to hear a nice first gen copy on the 2008 reissue that
to be honest,
destroyed me.
That's the one I sang to my kids. Like, that's the version at bedtime. Like, I would sing that iteration of it. Like, that's what I was trying to emulate. Anyway, sorry, I just wanted to hit upon it there. I know we've been going on here for quite a long time, and I thank you. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't cover something called Not Ready for Prime Time, live at the Cabaret Metro, Chicago, Illinois, January 11th, 1986. Bob, this is described as an imperfect live document of the band. Can you expand upon that, and also why it was included on this? I know why it's called imperfect. Again, similar to that version of Can't Hardly Wait. They're not quite ready when it's rolling. I know that part of it, but it's an amazing show. Can you talk about why this was included?
Yeah, well, like a lot of sort of things that we've found or included on these sets, this goes back years to when I was first researching the book. And one of the first people I interviewed who was really key to the story was Monty Lee Wilkes, the late Monty Lee Wilkes, who was the band's sound man from 85 to 87 and had a very illustrious career as a sound guy, worked for Nirvana, everyone from Nirvana to Britney Spears. He was a pro and a big figure in Minneapolis. And when I interviewed him for the book, he delighted in presenting a briefcase full of tapes that he had made, intermittently during those 2 years he was on the road with them. And one of the shows was this Cabaret Metro show, which was significant for me for a lot of reasons, because originally I was involved in the 2008 reissue, and there was some talk of maybe including some live stuff. And I knew of a guy, a taper in Chicago, a famous guy named Adam Jacobs, who had recorded and had a really pristine live recording of that, audience tape. And I thought, oh, wow, maybe there's some way to blend these two shows. Couldn't do that, but we used some of Adam's audience recording, so you've got the sort of atmosphere and the audience sounds, but Monty's board tape that he made that night. And again, it comes a week before they played Saturday Night Live, so that hence the name. And it was a one-off gig from a show that they had canceled in the fall of '85, playing the Metro, which was one of their favorite venues in Chicago, which was one of their favorite cities. And so it kind of hit a lot of buttons, even though it's sort of similar in era from the Live at Maxwell's recording, which was recorded just maybe a month later. We just thought, what an incredible opportunity to kind of get that classic, the last great burst of the Replacements as a live band, because by April or May of '86, things with Bob had sort of gotten to a really bad point. So that January, February tour is the last great burst of them. But unlike Maxwell's, where there was a giant mobile recording truck parked outside this little venue, this was kind of done unawares. The band was really sort of in their element, playing a great show, not on tour, crucially, because, they would have been partying, drinking. Paul would have worn his voice out. This is a one-off gig. So from that respect, it's truly natural, you're seeing like an animal in its natural environment. And yet it's a tight set. It's a great set. They're doing originals. They're doing, across the catalog, doing incredible covers. So it's it's an alternate almost version of Maxwell's, which was a great show and recorded with better fidelity. But I think this one recorded surreptitiously but with a more kind of natural effect from the band. And again, there's even a cover of Bob does singing of the Crusher, this Minnesota garage rock thing from the '60s. So I think it's just such a wild show and such a great so imperfect sonically, but absolutely perfect in terms of the creative spirit and the intention and the performance. Yeah, absolutely, a nice emotional end piece, I would say, to the set. Exactly. And uniquely, if you look at the kind of chronology of this box set, it begins January of '85 with the Alex Chilton sessions and ends a year later, January of '86, with this show at the Metro. And so in between, obviously, are all the recordings and demos and the recording of Tim. So it's kind of a year in the life, both in the studio and on the stage of the Replacements, and kind of, sort of the perfect bookend to the Tim story. Well, again, I really appreciate that insight into it. I hope people will check out this set. Before we leave this, Ed, I want to ask you, as someone who came to this, I think, relatively new, the freshest maybe of anyone's ears here, or well, except for me. Jason and Bob had obviously been living with this content for quite some time. I know you've covered a lot of ground here today, Ed. Was there anything in particular about this whole project that gave you some great insight into this band, or anything you found particularly fascinating that we haven't yet covered today?
Bob and Jason's obsession with the band and with this project. Dedication. More not an obsession, but dedication to it, and really wanting to get the best out of it and pushing me to get the best out of what I could do with it. Great guidance from these two guys. I just want to mention that. Without them, this would not have happened. I wouldn't have been on the project, and the project wouldn't have gotten off the ground as well. But their dedication to the band and to this project is outstanding. Well, and Vish, if I could say, I mean, in the same way with Ed, like I say, having worked with various people, very few producers, few people brought into this would have worked as hard or sort of wanted to sort of dig into the details and taken on a task as big as this was. And when I say it's sort of, there's something sort of cosmically blessed about this project. One of the things we wanted to do at the end of the day with the package was to kind of give it, as we did with the remix of Don't Tell a Soul, kind of give it a new sort of cover, a different visual representation to kind of indicate that this is a new record. And as I searched high and low for photos of the Replacements, something that would be worthy of a, cover image that strong and striking, it was very difficult because Replacements were a squirrely bunch, didn't pose for photos. There's very little of them in color at that time, but it turned out the one photographer who had unused shots of them, shot them for Rolling Stone in their rehearsal space at that time at the Tim era, turned out to be a guy named Moshe Braca. And it's just a beautiful, as you've seen, beautiful image. Yeah.
And Moshe Bracha is best known for his cover photo of the Ramones' Leave Home album, which is the first project that Ed and Tommy Ramone worked on. So in a way, the whole thing sort of kind of comes full circle, sort of put a bow on it with that. And so I think from the beginning, the fact that Ed was available and willing to do this, the fact that, the tapes were, and the sounds on tape were as good as they were, and the fact that, we were all able to kind of push in the direction that I think and kind of come up with this vision for this record, that to execute what the band had intended and wanted all those years ago, and to kind of make it come true. It's been a sort of, like I say, it's just been blessed sort of in this cosmic way from the beginning. And so just, I think, hopefully it is something that the fans are going to, once they get their hands on the whole thing, are really going to embrace and enjoy and feel the way that you do, and so many people who have heard it so far have.
That's beautifully put. Jason, you heard Ed correct himself from using the word obsession. Is there any more appropriate word for the Replacements and their fan base than obsession? What do you think?
Well, they are very
obsessed.
Opinionated. Very, very opinionated. There's a lot of love for this band.
Yeah,
and everyone wants to make sure that everything passes the smell test, is what I will say. They want to make sure that the ethics of, whatever they think the ethics of the band are, or the ethics of the songs, or the emotional attachment that they have to this band, is not being diluted in any way. I think everyone takes this band very, very seriously.
Yeah,
is what I would say.
Yeah.
And sometimes that turns into obsession. Sometimes that turns into delight. It can manifest itself in many different ways, Fish.
For what it's worth, as someone who's spent time with the original recording and this new one, for anyone who's doubting this set's essential nature, it's a whole new record. I can't stress it enough. It's really a beautiful thing you guys have all made together. One thing I didn't get to... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and the other thing that I marvel at constantly, Vish, is the fact that we get to do this. A lot of that is, we were very fortunate in that the first project we did, which was kind of just really a trial balloon with that Live at Maxwell's, it sold so well. And the people at Rhino who had come in and taken over at that point in the company's history were fans, were willing to sort of explore the catalogs of a band like the Replacements. And, so that success has begat the opportunity to do more of these and more ambitious projects. But the reality is, even with the sort of, relative success we've had with this, there are very few major labels that are investing the time, money, effort, and care in the catalog of a band that's as frankly as marginally commercial as the Replacements. Yes, they're beloved. Yes, they were nominated for Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yes, all that stuff. But the reality is, it's a lot easier to sell a lot of Fleetwood Mac records or Eagles records than it is to, with much less effort than it is to do something like this. So, thanks to Jason, thanks to Rhino, thanks to Mark Pincus at Rhino, the people who've been behind this have been willing to sort of let us run with it. And I think, the proof is in the pudding and the results. But I still just marvel that, at this point, so many years later, that this stuff is finally being taken seriously and given the kind of, weight creatively and respect that I think the Replacements deserve.
Well, it's our fourth box set, Bob.
Yeah.
In like 5 years, so that, and again, and that's the fans. When you talk about the fan base, as opinionated as they can be, as sort of, fixed in their ideas as they can be, they've also really welcomed this stuff and bought it and supported it. And so it's a kind of, there's a symbiosis there between us and and the record company and the people we get involved, like Ed and the fans. And at the end of the day, that's who it's for. It's for the people who really love this stuff and appreciate it and can have an even deeper appreciation of this band. So
I think most people are feeling really fortunate that the custodial care of this band is in your hands, Bob, in your hands, Jason. Like I can't imagine anyone would second guess that. Speaking of that, though, was the band themselves particularly involved in this particular set?
Yeah, the way that works, historically, the Replacements, unlike, say, someone like Elvis Costello, who might listen to every outtake and write liner notes and all that stuff, the Replacements, they didn't obsess over the mixes originally back in 1985. But it's true to say that, like, as we've worked on this stuff, and as I've worked with the band, basically going on 15, 16 years now, there's been a level of trust established. And after the success of Maxwell's, which led to Don't Tell a Soul and Dead Man's Pop, which was really kind of, frankly, Westerberg's aim in all this, he always wanted a remix of that. And he had the total trust of Matt Wallace, who was his close friend and set up his studio, and he worked with him multiple times. After that point, the next few projects were basically, archival stuff, and we had Peter Jesperson involved and Sorry Ma. So we've always had, and again, Darren Hill, who manages Paul, and John Kastner, who manages Tommy. From conception to execution, everybody's involved in every step of the way. And I know Tommy listened to this, and I know he was very deeply listening to Dead Man's Pop, because I had him trapped in my car for several hours when we listened to it and did a podcast on it. And I know Paul listens to all this stuff after the fact, maybe not, whatever, except for I know he was listening to Dead Man's Pop. So, it depends on the project, the varying levels of things. But yeah, I mean, the band is as involved in this as they've been in any other aspect of their career, I suppose, fair to say. But yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those things where Tommy has expressed to me how happy he is with the end result of things, and Paul as well. It's just like, they're just not the kind to mess with the minutia. And fortunately, which wasn't the case for probably the 20 years after they broke up, they've been willing to kind of let part of that go, and sort of trusting, me and us and Jason and Rhino to be like, okay, you guys seem to be doing okay with this. Keep it going. Okay. Because I think, they see the response from friends and fans and critics and the sales and all that sort of stuff. Paul increasingly is more, sort of retired and removed from this stuff. But, obviously I'm in day-to-day contact with Darren Hill, his manager, who sort of everything goes through him. But yeah, so yeah, no, everybody has, again, I think, more with some of the earlier projects, but as the trust has grown, it's sort of become a thing of like, they've let us go on with the business of getting this stuff together. Nice. But, again, with a remix, everybody had to weigh in before we gave it the okay. No,
that's lovely to hear. One quick thing I did on social media is I discovered through a friend that the logo, the font for Tim seemed pretty close to the Tim Hortons font here in Canada, the donut and coffee chain. Right. And everyone, I had not noticed this before. I had not noticed it, but my friend was like, did you ever? So I A-B'd them and I put it on one of the Facebook groups. Yeah. And people were like, oh, huh. I didn't see that mentioned in the liner notes. Do we know anything about this?
Well, the original design it's such a complicated history. The original cover was by Robert Longo, who was a big artist. Deborah DeStefan was kind of handling the art. She did some of the photos and and then there was a third designer. So it's very possible that the kind of third designer might have had some Canadian associations. I do know in the redesign that we did, or just in dealing with the designer, that it's not a real font that exists. Yeah. It is a kind of designed font. So if anybody copped the Tim Hortons thing, it could have been, it's close to a couple fonts. It could have been coincidence, but you're right. It does look a bit like that. And I think also the color scheme probably adds to that. But,
I'm not trying to,
again, maybe
I'm not stirring up trouble. I thought it was funny.
Very, very possible. I saw that after the fact and I thought, oh, that's interesting. It could be, but the replacements were notorious, design thieves from Hootenanny, which is basically they copped an old Elektra record to the cover of, Pleased to Meet Me, which is a riff on an old Elvis record. Yes. So, as Paul says, we're thieves anyway. So that it wouldn't surprise me if they'd stolen your national, logo there in Canada.
Not a champion of the Tim Hortons in any way whatsoever. I just want you to know that. Anyway, this was lovely. If people want to learn more about, no, wait a minute. You almost got off the hook there. Every time we end one of these, I say, hey guys, what's next? And you say, we don't know. Jason, is there a plan afoot for further things?
Well, there's a plan. Yeah, of course there's a plan. Okay. I mean, I think I'll just be upfront about it. I think there's some things that we want to do. There's some upcoming anniversaries that we might want to celebrate. There's one record where there's a lot of outtakes where we really want to look at it, and a lot of really meaningful demos. Yeah, I think.
But as I always admonish, you're not going to get anything else unless you buy this one first.
Right. That's right. We got to buy this one first. But I mean, I can't be so secretive whenever we're doing so many of these. They have a very limited discography.
I know.
So it's kind of, I've already told everyone that you're not going to get a deluxe stink.
Yes.
So, okay, now you do fill in the blanks.
Do the math. Okay, I got it. We'll thank you for that insight. Ed, are you actively making records and stuff these days? What are you up to?
Always.
Yeah.
Always. What am I doing? Well, Rosie Flores. There's an upcoming, I'll be remixing Dee Dee Ramone's records.
Oh, nice.
Coming up. And and I'm just, I've been working on this Replacements record as well. I've worked on it for quite a while, and it was enjoyable. I love doing it.
And Ed's done an amazing bit of work in the Dolby Atmos format, including Tim, which will be out in that. And also one of the other reasons, again, talking about the sort of cosmic connections, one of the first big records Ed worked on was Gladys Knight and the Pips' Midnight Train to Georgia,
right,
which has always been one of Paul Westerberg's favorite songs. So that was another connection there. And Ed's just done a 50th anniversary version of that, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, went to the original. I recorded that originally and mixed it. And I just did a 50th anniversary Dolby Atmos mix, and I did a stereo mix, which I don't think, So we were talking, Sony doesn't do what Rhino does. They just throw shit out there. They don't care. There's a lot of care in the Rhino camp, I must say. But it was fun to go back and revisit that 16 track. Also last year, I did some, worked on the partial catalog of the Talking Heads Atmos mixing, which was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
And fingers crossed someday soon, hopefully Ed's kind of remix of the End of the Century record will see the light of day via Rhino.
Hopefully. I don't know what's going on. I have no idea what's going on with that. We finished that, I worked in conjunction with Rick Rubin. We finished it like 3-4 years ago.
Oh.
And it's just being held up for some obscure reason.
At least 3 or 4 years ago. I know.
Johnny called me before he passed away, wanted to do it. And 2002 or 2003, somewhere around there. And he had talked to Rick at that time. And then, Johnny passed and it kind of went under the covers, but then it came up again when they started doing the box sets, all the Ramones box sets. And finally got together with Rick, went to his place and started working on it. And then, I finished it up here, back and forth with Rick listening, and we even have it mastered. It's ready to go.
Are they possibly confused and assume it can't come out until the end of the century? Is that what they're thinking? Maybe that might be the problem.
It could very well be.
Listen, Ed, for people listening, we've really focused in. Obviously, we've stayed focused, I think, mostly to talk about Tim. Ed, if you ever want to come back to my show and we can just go through your illustrious career, like I'm telling you, I told my wife you were going to be on this call. I'm like, Ed Stasium's going to be on this call. And she's like, okay. I'm like, you don't understand the records he's made. And then I explained it. She's like, oh, holy shit. Anyway, Ed, if you ever want to come back, please consider it an open invitation. Yeah.
I'm very grateful for my decades long career.
Yeah.
And, happy that I'm still working. I'm still doing this, still turning the knobs. That's all I do is just turn the knobs till it sounds good.
He does it better than anyone, though.
Unbelievable.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate the fact that Bob and Jason got me involved in this Replacements record. It's now dear to my heart.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and look forward to having a little get together on my birthday on the 27th.
Oh, nice.
And you're having an Atmos playback, and I'm looking forward to hearing that in a different environment.
I heard there was some sort of there's some Tim events coming up. Is that right, Bob?
There's going to be a event in Minneapolis at First Avenue's Depot Tavern on Thursday, the 21st, the night before the record comes out. Electric Fetus, the record store out there, is involved in doing it, so you'll be able to get copies of that. And then on the 27th in Los Angeles, we're doing a release event at Gold Diggers in East Hollywood, where we've got myself, Ed, and Jason will be there, kind of doing a little quick chat. And then there will be Staircase Wit is a local LA band that's really great. They're going to do a set of Replacements classics. And then Jason, health willing, will be spinning from the decks at Gold Diggers. And so it'll be a night of Replacement celebrations, 21st in Minneapolis at the Depot Tavern and the 27th of September at Gold Diggers in LA.
Nice. Very nice. Well, I hope people can make it out to those. Jason, if people want to learn more about how to obtain this box set outside of their local record stores, where would you like to direct them?
They should go to rhino.com and check out the web store. There's a lot of bundles. Bundle up. Yeah, bundle up, folks.
You sent me some great stuff, Jason. I can't thank you enough. I'm very excited to have
it. Once I get the actual Tim swag, I'll send you some of that too.
Oh my God. I live such a fortunate life because I know Jason and Bob. Ed, it's great knowing these two. They're so wonderful. It's so nice. Thank you so much in advance.
I'm grateful. I'm very grateful for being involved with this project.
Yeah. Now, if we can go out on a song from this edition, I wonder if we can, first of all. And if so, I don't want to give away too many nice treats. But Bob, if you can think of a song, a version of a song even to go out on, can you choose one for us?
Well, I mean, I love, if I was going to say one of two things, Ed's remix of Nowhere Is My Home, I think is just unbelievable, definitive. I also think, one of the Little Mascara, is another song that I think is kind of completely new in this form. So if you want to stick with something off the LP, I'd say Little Mascara. If you want to do something a little left field, then Nowhere's My Home.
All right, well, you've made me have to choose. So now Jason, who gave a thumbs up to both, has to pick. Jason, what would you pick? You pick one of them.
Little Mascara.
Absolutely.
Go for Little Mascara.
Okay.
Yeah,
I vote for Little Mascara. I vote for Little Mascara as well.
Okay.
Perfect.
From one of the greatest albums ever made, Tim, this is a new version of a song from it called Little Mascara. Jason, Bob, Ed, this was such a pleasure to have you on my show. Again, sorry for keeping us over time, but I hope you enjoyed yourselves, and I wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Vish.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, Bish.
Thanks, man. Take care.
Yeah, baby.
There you go. I hope you enjoyed hearing that version of Little Mascara by The Replacements. And thanks again to Bob and Jason and Ed for that in-depth talk. And it was fun, too. I think we had some laughs. There's a lot going on. I hope you enjoyed that conversation about The Replacements. This was all for the 803rd episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network, which is available wherever you get your podcasts, pretty much. If you can't find an episode that you've heard about or you're looking for it, or if you want to learn more about me, sign up for my monthly newsletter, please visit vishkhanna.com. You can also like Creative Control on Facebook, follow the show on Twitter at vishcreative, or you can follow me directly on Instagram and Twitter at vishkhanna. Also, I don't know, I'm on a bunch of things. I've put some of them in the link tree. There's a link tree link in the show notes, so if you click on that, you can follow me on Blue Sky and, I don't know, Mastodon and all those things if you want. You don't gotta, I'm just saying, there's some options there. You can also visit patreon.com/creative control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. $6 American or more a month grants you access to some exclusive content. You get episodes earlier than everybody else, and just stuff that I find in my archives that I think might be interesting for you. Stuff that precedes the show mostly, or stuff that wasn't meant for this show. You know, I don't know. I just find I have lots of different stuff still, so I put it up there. Anyway, that's what you get on the Patreon. Also, if you want a t-shirt, a Creative Control t-shirt, just message me on Patreon and I'll get you one while supplies last. I just mentioned this recently. I shipped one off to Tennessee. It's in the mail, and I'm happy to send a t-shirt your way, whether you live in Tennessee or not. Again, thanks for your support on Patreon. It means a lot. Speaking of thanks, I want to thank Blackbird Music, wonderful record retailer in Alberta. They have shops in Edmonton and Calgary, but you can also order things right from their website at blackbird.ca. Also want to thank Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton. All fine independent businesses based in Ontario, Canada, and they offer in-kind support for this show. I want to thank my friend Jim Guthrie for lending me some music of his on the show. You can learn more about Jim and buy his records at jimguthrie.org. And finally, thank you so much for listening to this in-depth look at this new edition of Tim, the Let It Bleed edition. I want to thank Bob, Jason, and Ed for their time. And if you're a Replacements fan, I hope you enjoyed that. And if you're not a Replacements fan, I hope you're curious now and you want to check them out and set out. What great dudes those three are. So thanks to them. Thanks to you. I will talk to you very soon. Bye for now.